everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and welcome to another tier list video. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, but as you just saw in my latest video where I reviewed the 30th anniversary season of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, I figured since it's been 30 years of Power Rangers, I figured why not? I'll probably rank or do a tier list of ranking all the different seasons of Power Rangers. So now that's what I'm going to end up doing. So without further ado, let's get into my tier list of the Power Rangers TV show. Now, if you may notice on some of these that there are two different photos of the same show for Samurai, Super Samurai, Megaforce, Super Megaforce, etc. That's mainly because I'm going to be ranking each of these seasons by how much I liked them. So the S, like I said, S tier will be ones that I think are really successful. A is for great, B is okay, and all that sort of stuff. Now I don't think you'll see any of these shows in F. That's all I can say. But anyways, let's get started. So first off, we're going to start off with the very first season of Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1, the one that started it all. And I gotta say, this show, again, I really loved the way this show ended up going. Again, it was the start of the entire show, and I gotta say, that definitely earns the successful tier. Because it introduced us to so many different Rangers, and I love the way it did that. Next up, we got Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 2. Now, Season 2, on the other hand, is an interesting one because it shows, it not only does it introduce us to the new White Ranger, which is basically just Jason David Frank's Green Ranger. May Jason rest in peace. Unfortunately, if you saw my last video where I reviewed Cosmic Fury, he unfortunately passed away back in November last year. So it's sad that he passed away. But with this show, I gotta say, I still think it was a relatively good show. I mean, it was the first 3 seasons are always going to be really good. Now, the 3rd season of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, I gotta say, I was pretty surprised by what a huge turn of events it ended up being. In fact, I actually think it's better than Season 2 in my opinion. Next up, we got Mighty Morphin Alien Rangers. Now, this is supposed to be taking place in between Season 3 of Mighty Morphin and Zeo, but this is because spoiler alert for Season 3, the Rangers get turned into children, and they have to get help from the Aquitar Rangers, and I really love the way they put it out, but unfortunately, it wasn't that many episodes, though, for Alien Rangers, and I will say, I didn't think it was as good as I mean, it's okay, but not as good as I was hoping for. Next up is Power Rangers Zeo. Now, this one is interesting because this one introduced us to the Machine Empire, which is another evil group of villains that basically pushed out Rita and Zed from the original 3 seasons. And I gotta say, I actually do like it a little better than Aliens, but it was still pretty good. Next up is Power Rangers Turbo. Now, this is supposed to take place after the Power Rangers Turbo movie, which I think I remember seeing, but not as much. And I gotta say, the villain for this show, Divatox, was someone that I will say I kind of like the Machine Empire more than Divatox when it comes to their characters. Next up, we got Power Rangers in Space. Now, I gotta say, Power Rangers in Space, I mentioned this a little bit in my review of Cosmic Fury, but this show was crazy because this basically made Zordon's energy wave, like when he sacrificed himself to wipe out all that is evil. It seems like not everything turned out to work, and I'll explain in a little bit, but I still love the way they did that. In fact, I like it so much that I would put it in the B category. Next up, we got Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. Now, this is an interesting one because this is actually the last show that we see a certain character that was introduced in the very first season of Mighty Morphin, and that was the two knuckleheads, Bulk and Skull. More specifically, Bulk, who was on Terraventure, and I was pretty surprised that he was okay with in this show. But in regards to Lost Galaxy, again, during the events of In Space, Zordon's energy wave was supposed to wipe out all that is evil, but it seems like it only wiped out a few people, and I was pretty surprised by that, because we still got a villain called Trakina, I believe her name was, in Lost Galaxy, and I was kind of surprised by that. And I will say, I definitely think it was just a little bit better than Zeo, but not as good as In Space. Next up, we got Lightspeed Rescue. Now, I will admit, Lightspeed Rescue is the one show where the outfits were interesting, to say the least. But I will say, I do think they were a little bit better than Alien Rangers, but I didn't think it was as good as I was hoping. Next up, we got Power Rangers Time Force. Now, Power Rangers Time Force, I gotta say, this is where it gets interesting, because I actually kind of liked it more than Mighty Morphin Season 2, because it was a really good show, I admit. The costumes were great, the way they traveled back in time was great, and I'm really looking forward to what they decide to do in the near future for Power Rangers. Next up, we got Power Rangers Wild Force. Now, one of the main Rangers in this story has an interesting connection to the villain of the show, and I do love the way they explore that. And I kind of wish, I will say that the villain himself, his motive for wanting to get revenge, whatever, on the people who made him suffer was not as exciting, but I still think it was just a little. I would say it's a little bit better than Turbo, but not as good as Zeo. Next up, we got Power Rangers Ninja Storm. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those shows where one of the actual Rangers did end up passing away, not too long after the show came out. But unfortunately, and that was the Red Ranger. But in regards to everything else, I thought the show was okay, but in fact, I think it was just a little better than Turbo, but not as good as Wild Force. Next up, we got Dino Thunder. Now, oddly enough, this is the last time we get to see the unfortunate passing of Jason David Frank as Tommy Oliver as he changes into a different colored Ranger, because he's been a different colored Ranger throughout most of these shows. I mean, he was the Green Ranger in Mighty Morphin Season 1. He was the White Ranger in Season 2. He was the Zeo Ranger in Power Rangers Zeo. He was the Red Ranger originally in the first half of Turbo, but then he switched to a different guy. And then he ends up being the Dino Thunder Ranger, the Black Dino Thunder Ranger. And I will admit, it was kind of cool to bring him back. And it's revealed that he lives in a new town called Reefside, and this is where he ends up living by the events of like Ninja Steel. But when it comes to Dino Thunder, I will say this definitely had a much better, compelling story than Wild Force did. Next up, we got SPD. Now, SPD is interesting because this supposedly takes place 2 years after the events of Cosmic Fury, and I gotta admit, I was pretty surprised by how, even though Lord Zed left, he was replaced by a new villain called Emperor Grum, and I will say he was a pretty formidable force. And in fact, I think it's as good as Time Force. In fact, I may actually like it better than Time Force. Next up, we got Power Rangers Mystic Force. Now, Mystic Force is an interesting story because this is the first time we see Rita Repulsa in a different form, in a much gooder form, since the events of Power Rangers in Space. And I love I will say their costumes looked pretty awesome. In fact, I actually think this one is actually better than In Space, mainly because of the costumes. Next up is Power Rangers Operation Overdrive. Now, to be fair, this one was an interesting storyline. I mean, it seemed interesting to bring in the son of Rita Repulsa and Lord Zed in this show, but this is the only time we see him, which was surprising to say the least. But I think he was killed off in this show, and that's why we didn't get him in future installments. But in fact, I actually think it's not as good as Ninja Storm, or I think it's better than Turbo and Lightspeed Rescue, though, in my opinion. Now we get on to another show I really enjoyed, Jungle Fury. Their outfits were interesting, and in fact, I actually would say it's just on par with Time Force and SPD. Next up, we got RPM. Now this, in fact, is the first show that actually takes place in a different dimension from the main continuity of the main timeline for Rangers. And it basically involves a computer virus that takes over the world with with multiple robots and invasions, and there's only one city left on their planet. And I gotta say, I love the way this show ended, but I will say I did kind of like it more than Lost Galaxy, in my opinion. It was definitely a much better way to tell on a different story, and not even that, but a different planet too, in the way that, in how it was different. Now we move on to the most recent iterations of Power Rangers, and I gotta be honest, this is when Nickelodeon started taking over for Power Rangers, and we get Power Rangers Samurai. Now, this is the next time we see Bulk return, but his partner in Skull has a son called Spike in this show. And I will say, I kind of liked that they brought Bulk back and his son Spike in a way, but I will say this show was definitely on par with like what happened after the events of In Space, and I definitely do recommend it. Now, season 2 of Power Rangers Samurai, I actually kind of think it was better. There we go. It was better than the first season. I really did enjoy it. Next up is Megaforce. Now, this is an interesting one because this one is supposed to celebrate 20 years of Power Rangers, and we did get to see like old Ranger teams in like key form, but it wasn't until Super Megaforce that they really started to put that in. And I will say, I actually kind of liked it just a little better than Wild Force, but not too much. Next up, we got Super Megaforce, and again, this is the one that featured the legendary battle that most people said was like the worst one they ever saw. But in my honest opinion, this is just my opinion, I actually did like the legendary battle in this show, so much so that I actually would put it in the A tier, just behind season 2 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Now we're about to get into the really good ones that I've been watching over the last few years, and we got Power Rangers Dino Charge. Again, I kind of love the theme song for Power Rangers Dino Charge, but I will say that it's going to be in the A tier, but I actually think I liked it more than season 2 of Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, mainly because of the theme song. It was pretty interesting. Next up, we got Dino Supercharged. Now, this is the season that I really started to get into because it was the ending of their era, and just like with RPM, it takes place in a totally separate dimension. But I actually like this dimension more than RPM's, so much so that I actually would put Dino Supercharged just above the first season. Now we're about to really move on to shows that I started to like Ninja Steel. This is where we first get introduced to the character of Mechanic, who we then re-see in Power Rangers Dino Fury Season 1. Interesting. In fact, the guy who plays Mechanic in in Ninja Steel has actually been with the Power Rangers universe since the events of SPD, which I kind of like. But when it comes to the first series of Ninja Steel, I love that it's revealed that the main Red Ranger of the show, has a long lost brother that turns out to be another Ranger, and the way they revealed that was really cool. And I gotta say, I actually found it just as good as Dino Charge, but not as good, in my opinion. But once we get to Super Ninja Steel, it's interesting because the main villain of Season 1 of Power Rangers Dino Charge, Sledge, somehow manages to get from his dimension into the universe of the Ninja Steel Rangers. And I gotta say, that was pretty interesting the way that happened, which makes me wonder maybe that could be the explanation of how Heckle managed to get into that universe and then ended up helping the Cosmic Fury Rangers. But anyways, we'll see how this goes. But I will say, I actually do like this just over Dino Charge Season 1. I do really like it. Next up, we got Beast Morphers. Seasons 1 and 2 will be next. But with Season 1, it's nice how they kind of connected this to all the other seasons. But the two characters that they feature in here to sort of be like a replacement to Bulk and Skull in a way, they weren't as iconic as those two. And but I still think it was a compelling story, enough to the point where I can put it above In Space. As you guys kind of can see, I still only have the first season of Mighty Morphin as the only successful one. Next up, we got Season 2 of Beast Morphers. Now, this one was interesting because it's actually revealed in this season that their main villain, Evox, was actually fragments of the Venjix virus from RPM. And I do love that they brought back characters like I forgot her name. It was the mentor of the RPM Rangers, and I really love that the main kid scientist in Beast Morphers turned out to be just like her. And I will say, I think it was much better than the first season, but not by much. Now we move on to the last 3 seasons of Power Rangers. We got Dino Fury Season 1, where we get introduced to the villain of Void Knight, but we never know much about him. And then it's revealed in Season 2 that he actually was trying to resurrect his wife. And again, Season 2 I'll get to, but with Season 1, just Void Knight as a villain in general, I gotta say, I didn't think it was as good as some of these other shows, but I will say I kind of liked it more than Mystic Force. Now we get to Season 2 of Power Rangers Dino Fury, where it's actually revealed that the main villain of this show, Void Knight, as well as his wife, Void Queen, which she later ends up becoming, turns out they are actually the parents of Dino Fury Pink Ranger, Amelia. And that was pretty surprising when they ended that. But I will say that the way they did this series was so much better than Season 1. In fact, I actually would liked it just more than Mighty Morphin Season 2. Then we move on to Power Rangers Cosmic Fury. Now, this is the show that not only finally introduced us to our first ever Orange Ranger, I forgot to mention that in my review of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, but they introduced us to a Orange Ranger, the very first one. Now, to be fair, there was somewhat an Orange Ranger in SPD, 2 of them actually, where one was actually just made up in someone's head, and another one had orange and white in their color scheme, but they weren't fully known as an Orange Ranger. This time we get our first full Orange Ranger in this show, and I kind of love that they did that. And again, the way they ended it is in my opinion is just as good as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1. So I only have the very first season of Mighty Morphin and Cosmic Fury both in the successful tiers, because to me these two it was the beginning and the end of, at least that's what they're saying, but it's possible that they could actually still be continuing with this continuity. But I really love the way both Mighty Morphin Season 1 and Cosmic Fury ended this era of Power Rangers, and I cannot wait to see what comes next. But anyways, that's all for now in this tier list video, and of course I will see all of you guys in the next video.